besides that, good morning. Hope that you are all doing good. I'm excited to go through the third sermon of our series, Christian Classics, where we go over stories that you've probably heard 1,000 times. They're super popular, but because they're so popular, a lot of times preachers skip over them and don't preach them to you. That's probably not true of this one today, but that's all right. We've already covered Daniel in the lion's den. We've done the paralytic. Today we're jumping back into the New Testament for the prodigal's son. So if you pin open to Luke 15, that's where we're going to begin. Luke chapter 15. We're going to start in verse 11. I'll give you just a second to turn there, but we're going to start in verse 11 and read through 16 to start. All right, so verse 11. There was a man who had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me the share of the property that is coming to me." And he divided his property between them. Not many days later, the younger son gathered all that he had and took a long journey far into the country, and there he squandered his property in reckless living. And when he had spent everything that he had, a severe famine came across that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into the field to feed pigs. And he was longing to be fed with the pods even that the pigs ate, but no one would give him anything. So this, of course, is the introduction to potentially one of the best-known parables of Jesus, the prodigal's son. So here we see this kid, he asks for his family's inheritance, his share, while the dad is still alive, so that he can go off and spend it recklessly. That's where we are dropped off. And the first thing that I want to say today is that a lot of times in our culture, with the way that we think, we can't actually fully understand these verses. I think sometimes we just kind of skip right through them. But I think we need to realize that in the culture of the time, these first verses, they're pretty shocking. The first thing I think we need to look at is what the son actually asks for. Look what he's asking for. The younger son wants his inheritance early. Now, this would be insulting in our own culture. It would. But I don't think we can understand how insulting this really was at the time that Jesus said it, in the culture that it was a part of. This is essentially like telling your father, "You're dead to me," in a culture where family values were held at such a higher value than even they are today with us. So this is a big deal. In fact, I think when Jesus is telling this story, he's 30 seconds into the story and mentions what the younger son did, and I imagine that the crowd is sitting there going, no way, not my son, not in a million years. I think they're starting to shake their head already, because it's truly unbelievable what this kid is doing and what this kid is asking for. So first, I think we need to realize how intense this ask really is of the son to the father. And what we need to realize is that it is absolutely sin. So this younger son asking the father for his share of the inheritance is absolutely disrespectful. It goes against the commandment to honor your father and your mother, and it is a sin. And one of the things that we'll learn as we continue reading these verses and looking into it is one of the ways that sin acts. So if we look at this, here's my point for today. Sin promises heaven, but delivers hell. So sin promises heaven, but delivers hell. So look at the kid, right? I'm sure that this kid didn't leave his father's house, leave this good house. We get this idea that the father is wealthy as well. So he's got a good situation. I'm sure that he didn't just leave this situation for fun, just because. Something enticed this young man. Something looked really good to this young man that pulled him to do what he did, pulled him to sin. And it doesn't exactly say what this enticement was, but it does mention, or we can imply a few things rather. Maybe he looked out at his culture and he saw this life of luxury and pleasure that others were living, and he said, "I want that for myself." So he took the money and ran with it. Perhaps he looked out and saw the promiscuity of culture, and he said, "I want that for myself." And he knew that money could buy it, so he took it and ran. Or maybe it was freedom that enticed him. Maybe freedom looked so good to him. He thought that his father's house was oppressive, or that he couldn't have all that he wanted. He felt held down. So maybe he wanted to go out and experience life to the fullest, right? And he knew that money could buy him everything. It doesn't matter which one of those is true. It's either way that you take it. sin is very, very enticing. It looks good, it feels good, it's good on the surface. Sin looks enticing. Here's your dumb analogy for the week. I find these scrolling on my phone, by the way. So I'm scrolling on my phone, and I see this video pop up, and there's a bottle of Coke. It's actually in one of the little tin cans, right? Tin can of Coca-Cola. And I'm not much of a soda drinker historically, but something about these last couple of years, I just like them, right? So you're scrolling, I see this can, and it looks so good. I mean, it's got the condensation on the side of it. You know, it looks like it's right out the fridge. It's not, but it kind of looks like it. And then you see it's red, and it says Coca-Cola right on there. You've had it before. You know the taste. You're looking at the bottle, and you can kind of taste it. Oh, it tastes so good. And then you can kind of feel the carbonation on your tongue. Oh, it's so refreshing. It's so good. You know, you're getting excited. Well, the reason that this was a video on my feed, this girl, she was talking through it, commentating on what happened. She says, look at this bottle of Coke. She said, I opened this an hour before I took my nap. Look what's inside it now. She dumped it out, and probably a fistful of ants and bugs and something else was in there after just an hour. So she dumped it out. Here's the idea. That Coke looked really good, but it didn't deliver what I wanted. It looked really good. It promised me really good things, good taste, refreshment. It wasn't actually all that good. As soon as you crack it open, as soon as you get in there, it's not what it promised to be. So it is with sin, at least in this story. In this story, sin promised this man heaven. It promised him a nice, cool, chilled bottle of Coke. And it gave him a fistful of ants instead. It gave him hell. Now, I think the same is true of us as well. That sin is so enticing in our lives. But sometimes you don't realize that that good-looking thing is actually going to bring death and destruction on the other side of it. Sin promises us heaven, but delivers hell. Now, moving on from this point, but keeping it in mind, we find the son, as a result of this sin, the hell that I'm talking about here that sin delivers, is he ends up in a pig field. Now, to us, that doesn't sound so bad. I mean, I'm in a room full of farmers. It couldn't be the worst thing in the world. But put yourself in their shoes. Put yourself in the Jewish culture, where pigs are reviled as one of the most unclean animals there is. So essentially what this is showing is that his sin led him to a place where he had no father. He had no more home. He had no more dollars. That his hope, this sin that was, or this enticement rather, that was out there has officially gone. All that is left is destruction. And here he is in a place being defiled by the animals around him in his own culture. So we get this image that he's even outside of his culture now. He has lost everything. That's the result of sin. But then it says that he recognized it. So we have this moment in the verse there where it says he recognized, he realized that he could just go to his father. He realized the effect of his sin. And I think that that's important. Sometimes we brush over that. But what's really important in this story is that the son realizes that there could be something better, realizes that he can go ask his father, realizes that the reason he's in with the pigs is because of his sin. And I say that's important is because I think a lot of times today, and I'm not really talking about the church as much as I'm talking about outsiders. I don't think that people realize that their unfulfillment in life is because they've bought into sin's lies. I don't think they realize that their constant pain, that their consistent bad attitude, their lack of joy is because of sin's destruction. And I'm not saying that somebody's sick, that it's just because they sin. That's not what I'm saying. But I am saying that sin hurts us, and sin destroys lives, and I think a lot of people don't realize. Some of the brokenness we have in this life is because of sin, and it's only once we realize, once we recognize that sin is doing this to us, that we can begin to seek an answer, that we can begin to seek God. And that's what he does. So in there, he realizes that sin is what's causing this destruction. So he decides to go tell his father all that he's done. He decides to go confess and ask to be a servant in his father's home. And I'll be quick with this one, but it's worth noting that this is what clear thinking looks like. Clear thinking looks like recognizing your own sin and recognizing that you don't deserve to just be welcomed into some house of your father. You deserve to be a servant. you are in a state of debt. So the good news of the gospel, we'll get there, means that that's not the case. But I do just want to point out that in this story, this young man is thinking a lot clearer than a lot of people in our society today. That he recognizes his brokenness in this confession, and he recognizes that all he deserves is to be but a servant. So that's worth pointing out. But of course, we come to the fun part of the story. We come to the fun part where I call this section the father who runs, because I think that's fun. We see he's walking on his way home. He hasn't even made it home yet. He's not even home yet. And the father begins to run after him. The father begins to run after him. The way that I probably describe this moment best, have you ever, I'm going to use my parents as an example, but it could be anyone. Have you ever done something wrong, gone to your parents or whoever it was to admit that you were wrong, and you know that you're wrong? You're not trying to pull anything, you're just admitting blatantly. And since you know that you're wrong, you're expecting to get chewed out, you're expecting to be cussed out, you're expecting to be slapped, something like that, because you were wrong. You were really wrong. So you say it, but rather than do that, they kind of lean in, they give you a hug, they say, oh, I love you, something like that. That is like a micro version of essentially what I think the mood of this next section is, expecting harm, but actually receiving love. See, I think the best way to explore this next section where the father loves on his son is to first talk about what the father probably should have done. What in his culture, in the time, the father should have done to his son when he returns home. So first of all, the first point, I've got three things here. The first thing the father should have done when the son came home is he should have remained seated. So in this culture, in the time period, men in power would not get up and go to other people. That's a disrespectful thing. As a person in power, you don't have to do that. Other people have to come to you. That's how it works. So you've got kings. Kings don't go meet people. People come meet kings. So the father should have absolutely, especially given the son, remained seated, waited for the kid to get all the way up to where he was. The father should have remained seated. The second thing, the father should never have referred to him by anything more than say his name. He should never have called him son. He's not a son anymore. In this culture, the way that it works, when that kid took off, he took his sonship with him. So in basic terms, that kid, though that is his biological father, it is not actually his father. He doesn't have the right to call him father anymore. And in the same way, the father is not supposed to call him son, because though he might be a biological kid, that is not his son anymore. He took that with him when he left. So first, he should have remained seated. Second, he should have not referred to him by anything other than his name. Third, he should have said, "You are dead to me." Now, part of that, I mentioned the commandments. One of them is honor your father and your mother. Well, in Leviticus, what we see, if you break that commandment, you're actually supposed to be stoned. So it's kind of extreme, but we do see that in reality, this case, what this young kid is doing is actually grounds in the old law for death. Now, under the Roman rule, that's not going to happen. But at the very least, this father should say, "You're dead to me. I think that you're deserving death." So that's what this son deserves. But contrast that to what the father does. If you'll read with me, verses 20 through 24. It says, "And he arose and came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion, and ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, 'Father, I've sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Bring quickly the best robe, put it on him. Put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet, and bring the fattened calf and kill it. And let us eat and celebrate. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And they began to celebrate." So get this, the father who should have remained seated got up and ran to meet him. The father who had every right to wait, who culturally should not have been the one to get up, says, "I don't care about the rules. I don't care about who owes who. I see my son and I'm running after him." Then we see him, he gets there, and the son makes one of the best confessions in all of the Bible. And then the father wraps his arms around him and begins to order this feast. And look at the reason that the father gives for why a feast is in order. He says, "For this son of mine was dead and is alive again." So there we see it. The father who should have not used anything more than his name, or called him an unfaithful child maybe, instead says, "For this my son. For this is my son." And the father who should have killed his son in his heart, who should have said, "You are dead to me," instead says, "This son was dead but is now alive." So instead of desiring his son's death, he's rejoicing in the fact that his son was found alive. And I think that, we're not supposed to make everything about us, but I think that Jesus preaches this because it's true about us. So I think if we were to look at it, we also can relate with that younger brother. We should have had to go and climb our way into heaven because of our sin. It's not even possible, but we should have had to build a ladder, get our way up there to meet God, like sitting God who isn't going to meet us. And then we should have been called unfaithful humans, because that's what we were. And then God should have set us out to be condemned to die, because that's what should happen. That's what we deserve. But that's not what happened to us. Just like the younger brother, he didn't get what he deserved. When Jesus saw us, he got out of heaven. So not only did he run to meet us, but he ran down. So he left heaven to come to earth. He left a position of honor, respect, worship to come essentially be treated like dirt around us, all the way to his own death. We killed him. So he ran down to get us. And then more than that, when we were baptized, we became sons and daughters of God. And when we were saved, all of heaven, it says, in the parable that comes a few before this, all of heaven rejoiced because the one who was lost is now found. So rather than being owed this condemnation of death, instead all of heaven erupts with joy because someone who was on a path of death is now on a path of life. So this is our truth. So my hope today, I've got one more point in this sermon, but if you walk out with having done nothing else, it would be that you look at this and you look at the reality of how much God loves you and how God loves and how unconditional and undeserving his love is. And then it would just make you sit there in awe of God. That's my essentially one goal for the sermon today. So, if you would, for me, spend some time this week thinking about that, thinking about how cool this is, that this is our reality. We're moving on, my last point, because the story kind of unfortunately doesn't end. We have this next section of the older brother, or as I call him, the lost brother. You'll read with me, verse 25 through the end. Now this older son was in the field, and as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing, and he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And the servant said, "Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf, because he's received him back safe and sound." But the older brother was angry and refused to go in. His father came out to see him and entreated him. But he answered the father, "Look, these many years I have served you. I have never disobeyed your command. Yet you never even gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured our property with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf for him?" And he, God, said to him, "Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad, for this brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is now found." Now at first, what the older brother did kind of sounds legit. It kind of sounds reasonable to say, but I'm going to tell you that it's actually not. While it might be perceived that the older brother was right here, he was not. The older brother was dishonoring the father just as much as the younger brother was in the beginning. Even the older brother made the father come to him. So it's just as dishonoring. And then look at what the brother does. The older brother points to the younger brother's sin. He points out everything that the younger brother has done wrong. But yet when it comes to talking about himself, he talks about everything that he's done right. That kind of sounds like a Pharisee to me, pointing out the sins of others, but the good works of themselves. And even worse, he's kind of acting like he deserves to be in the father's house, but the younger brother doesn't, because he does good things and the younger brother does bad things. And we call that legalism. We call that technically work-based salvation. And it's not really the gospel of Jesus. We're saved by grace. So the older brother is actually full of hypocrisy, full of pride, and he's got the wrong idea of the gospel. And that's why I say that he is a lost brother as well. So here's the reality. We have a man inside the house of God, who's acting and misunderstood in the same way that someone outside the house is. And so I'm not saying this of any of us, but I am simply saying that there is a present danger that you can be inside the house and that you can get it wrong. You can be inside the Father's house and you can be lost. You can be wrong about something. And so I guess this morning, I want to go over just two little doctrinal points that we learned from the older brother's misconception in the hopes of preventing us and kind of safeguarding us from making the same mistake that the older brother did, so that we can avoid where he went wrong. So here's two doctrinal points that the older brother got wrong. The first is that it is not works, nor is it others' morals that save us, but it's the Father alone that saves us in his grace, love, compassion, and Jesus. So I'll say it again. It's not works. It's not good things that we do that save us. It is Jesus' love, Jesus' grace, and faith that saves us alone. And secondly, and I'll explain what I mean, there is no better or worse. There's only lost and found. So in this, we don't hear that the older brother was better, or that he was worse, or that the younger brother was worse or better. We hear that they were lost and then found again. And what I think that language means, we talk a lot about good people, or at least society does. Good person. Was he a good person or was he a bad person? But in terms of eternity, there's no such thing as a good person or a bad person, because good people are still sinful and bad people can still receive Jesus. So in reality, there are either people who have Jesus pouring his life out and healing them with his grace, so that's the found people, or there are people that are still lost in their sin and looking for life, and those are the lost people. So those are my two truths today. It's not works that save us, but it is Jesus Christ who saves us. And it is not that some people are good or bad, but that they are either lost or found by Jesus. And so with that, I just want to give us essentially two thought experiments. Based on those two principles, this is stuff that we can actually go out and do, so that rather than being like the older brother, we can show the same love that the Father shows. So the first one is this. If we are saved, not by being good people, but because Jesus saved us, then our response to those outside of the faith, our response to people who aren't yet saved, should not be to judge their morality, but should actually be to show them Jesus' love. And here's the thought. Rather than judging someone else on what they do good or what they do bad, we should simply show them the love that took us out of our own badness. So the thought here is, rather than kind of being judgers, we instead turn into people who love others, because we recognize that we also are broken. And then second, if fatherly love was not withheld from the younger son. So the younger son did all this disrespect. If love was not held back from him, then neither should we hold love back from anyone else. I'm not saying this means that we approve anyone's actions that are wrong. All I'm saying is that love continues even in the face of someone else's sin. This was the older brother's mistake. This is why the older brother was lost, was because he refused to simply love him as the Father loved him in light of his forgiveness. So we must be ready to love everyone, not to be the judge, but to be the lover, because Jesus serves as our judge so that we don't have to. So with that, the ultimate answer today is that we must love as the Father loved in this verse. For our time of invitation, I just want to invite you into that love. So my prayer today, my guided prayer for you today would just be to pray that God would fill you up with so much love that it would seep out into others. We see that imagery with David. He says, my cup overflows.
Well, pray that God would fill you up with so much love that it overflows out of you, bubbles out of you, so that other people begin to notice, oh, I can see God's love in you. Oh, I can see God's love in you because you have so much in you. So I'm going to pray for that. We'll sing our song and we'll get out of here. So Jesus, thank you so much for loving us. Thank you so much for the love that we don't deserve, but that you give us anyways. And I pray this week, Lord, that you just fill us up with so much love that other people would begin to notice how loved we are, how much we love others. And I just pray that whatever truth it is that you want us to get out of this message and out of this gospel story that you gave us, that it would sink in this week and that we'd apply it as you'd like. Thank you for saving us and treating us better than we deserve. In Jesus' name, amen.